to A People's History of Violence, the podcast where we go entirely too deep into history's assassinations, affairs, crimes, coups, conspiracies, cover-ups, terrors, and trials. Or, as this episode will show, assassinations, and assassinations. I'm your co-host, Isaac.
I'm your co-host, Peter.
And Peter, it's still Assassinations Month.
Yeah, it's still November, which is, the magic month.
History has caught up with us on this month and the past 2 months. The conjuncture is spitting out a lot of assassinations itself in just the past 60 to 90 days, and a lot of updates on old assassinations. So we have a very stacked episode today.
Yes, much to say.
So
we're starting out with the old stuff, right?
Yeah, the very old stuff, the 57-year-old stuff. On October 30th, so not technically this month, but, very close in time, the city of New York actually made a massive payout in terms of a settlement. They paid something like $27 million to two people, or one living person and then the deceased person's estate, who were wrongfully accused and wrongfully convicted of being two of the three assassins of Malcolm X. So basically 3 people were charged with the murder of Malcolm X in 1965, in February of that year, and charged with being 2 of the 3 shooters who actually walked up to him in the Audobon Ballroom, or ran up to him and assassinated him with 3 different weapons. Now, 2 of these people, however, were named at the time Norman 3X Butler, now Muhammad Aziz, and at the time Thomas 15X Johnson, now Khalil Islam, who is deceased. He died in 2009, I believe. They were both members of the Harlem Mosque of the Nation of Islam. They were both members of the Nation of Islam's paramilitary kind of attachment called the Fruit of Islam. Mm-hmm. Well, the third guy who was charged and convicted, a guy who goes by the name of Thomas Hagen or Talmadge Hayer, although now he's Mujahid Abdul Halim. Although I don't really know why you would change your name or say your name was Talmadge Hayer if your name was actually Thomas Hagen. Seems like Thomas Hagen's a more convenient name. But anyways, he pulled off one of the most strange things that has happened in trial, which is the actual Columbo type change in the middle of a trial, which is after testifying that he wasn't involved at all and didn't know anything about this assassination, he got on the stand and said that, yes, he did shoot Malcolm X. He did shoot him with a .45. I mean, he was captured on scene after being shot in the leg. Like, he was obviously there. But the other 2 men, who were members of the Harlem Mosque, who he never met in his life, were not involved. And so a lot of suspicion about their convictions had remained since that trial. A lot of eyewitnesses testified that they knew them from being part of the Nation of Islam at one time themselves, and testified against them. But last year, the district attorney Manhattan, Cyrus Vance, filed a joint motion with the defense, much like we saw in the Adnan Syed case, requesting that the court vacate their conviction, just get rid of the conviction, because they were in fact actually innocent. They had alibis, and the eyewitness identification evidence that was used to convict them was false. And I think the important thing here, and which most people who study the case know, is because we actually know who the killers were.
So that's huge. I'm surprised this isn't a bigger story.
I know, it just kind of gets a little bit of play in part of the New York Times and then kind of continues on.
So I guess my question is, so Aziz and Islam, the 2 wrongfully convicted people,
right?
They, you say there was eyewitness evidence. Were they kind of, I guess first I'd want to know about the condition of their trial. Was it as much of a, bad trial as, let's say, the Rosenbergs got? Was it, a railroading? Was it an honest mistake? What do you think we're looking at here with that?
Yeah, because that's in a lot of ways. And I mean, I might have to back up for a second just to say what specific, like just some details about the assassination itself, so we can talk about how the trial was rigged.
Okay.
But you're right. The important thing here is that you don't get a $27 million payout, or rather settlement. You're not able to bring a huge suit against the city if all that happened was a mistake that anyone could have made. Like, this isn't a case where like an eyewitness or one eyewitness was just mistaken, right? This was a case in which there was wrongdoing done by the government.
Sorry, just to be clear about what happened after, to see like the scale of the mistake. Were Aziz and Islam, were they held in prison from then until now?
So no, both of them were paroled, and they
Okay.
did eventually get out of prison, which, I mean, tells you a lot about like the assessment of their risk of violence,
Right.
their supposed criminal connections, that the prison authorities were like, no, we can definitely let these guys out. But they both served 20 and 21 years in prison, I believe. So that part of their lives is gone. I mean, many of them they lost connection with their families. They didn't see their children grow up.
Mhm.
And so on. But what they were accused of, and this is the basic facts on the Malcolm X assassination, is on February 21st of 1965, Malcolm X was addressing an audience of people who'd come in to hear him speak as part of Muslim Mosque Inc., which was his split organization that he created in the last year of his life when he had split away from the Nation of Islam and from Elijah Muhammad.
Mhm.
I mean, it's a fascinating year, and obviously not something that we can't get into on just one of these quick cut episodes.
Right.
Like to get into in a larger series, maybe with an expert on the case. But that last year is pretty fascinating. He reaches out across both lines in the civil rights field. He reaches out across racial lines. He addresses Socialist Worker Party conferences
Mm.
and starts stating that in the last few months of his life that he no longer considered himself by vocabulary a black nationalist, rather that there should be a joint black-white struggle against oppression. It's a fascinating time, but of course, when he split from the Nation of Islam, he was marked for death
Yes.
by Elijah Muhammad.
Yes.
And there were a host of Fruit of Islam members who were willing to do that. Now, so he was constantly on edge because there were attempts on his life at home. There was an attempt to burn down his home. And at this Audubon Ballroom speech, he was addressing the audience from podium. They're there in the ballroom on folding chairs. And there's a distraction caused in the back from kind of a fake pickpocket incident where someone says, "Get your hand out of my pocket." You can see it in the Spike Lee movie Malcolm X. That takes the audience's attention towards the back in a kind of classic misdirection. And then one of the co-conspirators sets off a smoke bomb in the back, which provides a further distraction and cover for the first of the gunmen to run up to Malcolm, who's on stage trying to calm the crowd down, and shoots him with a sawed-off double-barreled shotgun. After he shot, two other gunmen run up, and one with a .45 caliber semi-automatic pistol, and another with a 9mm Luger, shoot Malcolm X. Although the fatal wound really comes from the shot to the chest from the shotgun. Now, after this occurred, the NYPD went on a hunt for two of the assailants because one of them, at least, had already been shot in the leg and being captured, almost beaten to death by the understandably enraged Muslim Mosque Inc. members. And most of those people at the Audubon Ballroom had previously been Nation of Islam members who essentially followed Malcolm into Muslim Mosque Inc. After what he revealed about Elijah Muhammad and after his kind of changing ideology. So they knew people intimately who were members of the Nation of Islam Mosque in Harlem. At least that crowd did. And so several of them, perhaps honestly, but also it looks like shaped by interrogations from the New York Police Department, believed that a guy at that time named Norman 3X Butler had been there. The problem with this, and as was revealed at the trial, is Norman 3X Butler at that time, now Muhammad Aziz, had a pretty solid alibi. His legs had been pretty severely injured, and he had been examined by his doctor that day, and then he was resting at home. And after Malcolm X was assassinated, he called the Harlem Mosque in New York, kind of as a community center, to inquire what was going on. He also had several family members and friends testify that he was at his home and therefore couldn't have gotten there. The other defendant, Khalil Islam, now deceased, he was also at home during that time, as testified by family members and so on. The reason that you have this payout, the misconduct at the trial, consists in the fact that throughout this whole process, both the FBI and the Bureau of Special Services Investigations, which is called BOSSI, had loads of informants at the Audubon Ballroom. I think I heard in a documentary that the FBI had 9 informants in the Audubon Ballroom alone, people who were passing information to them and could have testified, and were giving them descriptions of what the shooters looked like. And the description they gave of the shotgun wielding guy, the guy who actually did kill Malcolm X with his shotgun shot to the chest, did not at all match Khalil Islam. And it did accord with other information that the FBI received from other informants that the actual shotgun shooter was a guy who was at the Newark Nation of Islam mosque. That this was all an operation done from out of town. And this accorded with the fact that the one guy that they definitely captured, who definitely did shoot Malcolm X at the scene, Thomas Hagen, aka Talmadge Hayer, aka and so on, he was not a member of the Harlem Mosque. He was a member of the Patterson, New Jersey Mosque. Had associates and friends at the Newark Mosque. So in the years subsequent to the assassination and subsequent to Thomas Hagen kind of giving the statement at the trial that I don't know these two guys, they weren't the ones involved, I was involved, a radical attorney named William Kunstler interviewed Thomas Hagen and got one year and then one the following year, 2 affidavits from Thomas Hagen describing with as much detail, seemingly as much detail as he knew about who the actual killers were, who he met, and where one could find them, and where he got them from, and what they did at the time. And so he gave, Thomas Hagen said that he built the smoke bomb, but that he wasn't the one who threw the smoke bomb. He gave the name of the actual shotgun killer as a guy named William X. And probably the most diligent expert researcher on this case, Abdurrahman Muhammad, who was the one that worked with Manning Marable on the assassination portion of his biography of Malcolm X. He did a lot of questioning and investigation in the Newark area. He built trust with a lot of witnesses and came to figure out that this man was actually a guy who went by the name of William 25X Bradley, and then he changed his name to Mustafa al-Shabazz, and he lived out his days without ever being formally indicted or investigated as a Cory Booker supporter in Newark, New Jersey.
Wow. Okay.
The thing is, too, is that it was completely an open secret in Newark, New Jersey. Like you can see in the documentary that he did, Who Killed Malcolm X. You know, he asked
Muhammad did
that Abdurrahman Muhammad did. Yeah. That he talks to Ras Baraka, the current mayor, and he's like, you know about Mustafa al-Shabazz, right? And you can see Ras Baraka being like, hey, yeah, shotgun man. Yeah, don't want to talk about that.
Wow.
Mustafa al-Shabazz, you know who he is?
Shotgun dude. Right. No, I remember. I know what it's about, you know. And, you know, guy was known for, you know, having a shotgun and all of those. So it made everything kind of sound like it is a possibility that this could be real. There's no evidence of it, but I've heard it, you know. Some of that stuff could be dangerous, you know what I mean? So, I mean, that's why I don't like to, you know, deal with gossip.
So what directed either the authorities or whoever, I imagine it has to have been the authorities because they laid down the indictment, who directed them towards Aziz and Islam?
See, that's the strange part, is you can't quite get a sense of really whether they were going off potentially a couple witnesses saying we think it's these two guys, even though we didn't necessarily see them at the Audobon Ballroom that day, because I know that you had several witnesses say that they saw Norman 3X Butler in a car after they had torched or attempted to torch Malcolm X's house. Probably were involved in that. These guys who got exonerated were very candid that, like, at the time, if someone had asked them to be a part of a plot to kill Malcolm X, they would have been.
Right.
Because that was the feeling in the Fruit of Islam organization at the time, but that they weren't, which is a very, you know, it's a very candid admission. But some of the details as far as misconduct goes that show that the FBI and NYPD actually kind of steered the thing in this direction is they actually pretty much intimidated a couple of witnesses into making identifications and sticking by their identifications. People who didn't identify these guys at first, who had seen them in lineups and didn't pick them out, and then we're just kind of showing them again. Are you sure it's not this guy? And when an FBI agent or an NYPD detective, homicide detective tells you that a couple times, you get the message.
Mm.
Right. And I mean, that was there wasn't a lot of wiggle room that New York City could have done to get out of this lawsuit. Like the
Right.
in that respect was there. They built their identifications, right, of these two guys. And
Yeah,
they
the
also,
question.
yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
And I was going to say, and they suppressed a lot of information that they had about the identity of the real killers. They had a person who was a source who told them that the killer of Malcolm X was a lieutenant at the Newark Mosque. None of the guys who were convicted were a lieutenant at the New York Mosque. William 25X Bradley, who became Mustafa al-Shabazz, was a lieutenant at the Newark Mosque. He was their enforcer, basically. When people were getting out of line, he would go beat them up. He was an ex-Marine. He was very skilled.
Why would the NYPD and the FBI want to hang a case on these two Harlem guys versus the Newark guys?
Yeah, and that's so the unanswered question about that gets a little speculative is everyone feels like, and I think understandably, that they may have been protecting one of their own informants. In which case, did they direct an informant to pull this off, or did they find out that it was going to happen before it did happen? And my feeling is probably. One thing we don't have is, even though they had loads of informants in the Newark Mosque and the killers came from the Newark Mosque, there's no information in the FBI files that's been disclosed as to the reaction of people in the Newark Mosque afterwards, an indication of whether any of their own informants or people who knew their informants participated in the plot. And there's a really suspicious aspect, especially with the murder weapon, which is the NYPD was led through some of their informants to finally recover the shotgun in Brooklyn, although there's conflicting testimony that the shotgun was given to them on scene at the Audobon Ballroom. And to make it even more suspicious, the shotgun that killed Malcolm X is gone. It is missing. Cy Vance's office tried to locate it to respond to this motion and kind of further investigate the case. The defense attorney's investigators tried to find the shotgun, and even though it was property of the New York City police, it is missing. And I mean, you even have suspicious things that are talked about in Abdurrahman Muhammad's documentary, where he's asking questions about this guy, William 25X Bradley, and people respond, I think it's just best you leave that alone, because if he's out right now and no one's doing anything about it, then he probably has some kind of government protection.
Right.
But I'm less sure about that with Bradley, who, I mean, did a lot of time in prison after this, than I do feel about the very strange behavior of the one missing co-conspirator who was named by Thomas Hagen, which is a guy named Wilbur Kinley.
Okay.
And he also knew him as Kinley.
So what's the story with Wilbur Kinley? Because I feel like we're throwing around a lot of names. We might want to pump the brakes a little. So
sure.
we think that Shabazz, formerly William 25X Bradley, the shotgun shooter, might have federal protection. But you're more sure that Wilbur, the smoke bomb guy, does.
Let's just say less I'm sure than I suspect.
He gives off more of a vibe.
Yeah, and it's due to a couple things in just comparing him to other cases where there were informants involved. So, for example, in the murder of the civil rights worker Viola Liuzzo, that the FBI had an informant who was a long-time informant in the Ku Klux Klan at the time, who was in the car when she was shot.
Yes.
He was in the murder car, not in her car.
Yes.
I mean, right. I think I've seen some people argue that he possibly did the shooting.
Right. To be clear, the crime itself happened in, what was it, the late 50s, early 60s?
It was the early 60s. It was actually right around the same time, I believe.
Okay. So yeah, I think it was Kennedy era. So
yeah.
So before 3.
65,
so yeah, this was
65. She died a month after Malcolm X.
Oh, it was 65. Okay. Yeah. I got confused then. Yeah. So
could the shotgun man have been an informant? Possibly, but the real kind of indication of protection with Wilbur Kinley is first his participation is very like circumscribed. So Wilbur Kinley is the one who Thomas Hagen says actually set off the smoke bomb that he built, which was the diversion. And Wilbur Kinley is the guy whose car was used to bring all of the assassins over to the Audubon Ballroom to actually carry out the murder. But other than that, no one seems to know anything about him. And the even more tantalizing and frustrating thing is no researcher seems to have figured out what happened to Wilbur Kinley.
So like we don't know.
Everyone else has been tracked down, their death dates confirmed, their whereabouts confirmed, open secrets about him. But Wilbur Kinley remains a cipher. I think one researcher in the early 90s concluded he must be dead. But I mean, there's a lot of cases of, an informant is in enough danger. Let's have him declared dead and they'll just get a new identity and go into some other part of the country. That does happen.
If we're doing irresponsible speculation here,
which we are. Yeah. And this is irresponsible speculation.
Right. The link. So yeah, okay, whether it obviously innocent people should not have to go to prison. If you think anyone should go to prison. But, one group of members of the Nation of Islam who in 1965 were perfectly willing to kill on the order of Elijah Muhammad getting thrown in prison versus another group of more or less the same, right? Harlem versus New Jersey Nation of Islam members might not seem like, it's, a big deal to the people involved, but you might see why this didn't become as big of a story as it could have. But, there's long been speculation that the FBI or the NYPD or both either set Malcolm X up or knew that he was going to be assassinated and did nothing about it. And I guess sort of where Wilbur might come in to that irresponsible speculation narrative would be if there was one character in the plot who could have been that bridge, right? The FBI or the NYPD's man in the kill team, if you will, now that we all use, spy movie terms all the time. And he's the one who we can't find.
All we can really say is that he seems like a complete cipher.
Mm-hmm.
And he disappears. And he's the only one who appears able or seems to be able to disappear. And he played this crucial role on the day of actually getting them to the place on time.
Yeah.
And in the right place.
Right.
And that's kind of all we can say about him. But if there was agent provocateur is only almost the wrong word, but some kind of penetrative informant who saw this through, it seems like a good candidate.
Yeah. And given what we know about the degree to which the police, particularly the FBI, had infiltrated virtually every dissident type group, right? It's not quite right to call Nation of Islam a leftist group, and the FBI ultimately did concentrate more on leftists than others, but they were certainly afraid of black nationalists.
Yeah, I would actually say that, I'm not comparing the Nation of Islam to the Klan, but in terms of the ability to manipulate them to pull off an attack on leftists, or at least, left dissident, you could call Malcolm X in this case.
Right.
They were very useful.
Yeah. And the FBI is
very vulnerable to penetration. They were thoroughly penetrated organization as far as having officers and members who were on the FBI's payroll.
So it's very hard to conceive of a world where something as major as the assassination of the former heir apparent would have gone completely unnoticed by the at that time.
And it's still strange to me, honestly, that this wasn't a bigger news story, that one of the major assassinations of the 1960s has been unresolved. It's been made unsolved.
Right. And arguably one of the more efficacious ones.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe it would have been, I don't know, a flash in the pan or something, but who knows what Malcolm X could have accomplished with his profile his charisma, his organizational abilities, if he wasn't in this kind of blind alley of this religious fundamental, this very strange group of the Nation of Islam.
Yeah, I think
that could have been, I mean, J. Edgar Hoover
part of his life building it. So moving from the tragic to farce. In recent news, we had the David DePape, I've seen him called the attempted assassin of Nancy Pelosi, which I think is wrong. He's included here for that reason, but this whole kidnap torture attempt at her house in San Francisco, I just see this whole thing as pretty sick.